All right. Next, I'm going to bring to the floor Steve Showen. Steve Showen is one of the co-chairs and delegates from the Miami-Dade Green Party, one of the oldest and most esteemed Green parties in the state. They are a cornerstone. They're one of our rocks. Steve is one of the first people I met in the Green Party before I became a member, and his activism has always been an inspiration to me. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about America and Cuba, and I would like to thank him for his time. Steve, you have the floor.
Thank you, LeBeau. Um, I should say that outside my window is a Memorial Day military air show, so I hope that doesn't interfere with this presentation. So as far as I'm concerned, Kathy can start the slideshow that goes along with this. So I should say that one of Miami-Dade Green Party's main engagements is with the U.S. Hands Off Cuba and Venezuela Coalition in South Florida, or HOCV as we like to refer to it. Our activities have included producing a multi-county event hosting the DC Venezuelan embassy protectors, Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers, and hot on our burner in planning with other groups for the June 6th kickoff in Miami of the Home Run for Julian tour, raising awareness for the defense of Julian Assange, featuring his father and his brother. And promotional material is being prepared as we speak to be sent out ASAP. For the last year, HOCV has been primarily involved in supporting a movement springing out of the Miami Cuban American community, calling for the ending of the 6 days long U.S. blockade of Cuba. HOCV member Pete Seidman wrote a beautifully descriptive article about it, which appears on GPFL's website entitled Bridges of Love, Something Big is Happening in Miami's Cuban Community. Tomorrow morning will be the 11th monthly consecutive caravan to bring attention to the issue. The caravan movement has since spread to some 30 American cities, including Tampa, Florida, and now expanded around the globe, including Russia and Cuba. I would like to read an excerpt from Pete's article just to give you some of the flavor and wrap up with some concluding remarks. I urge everyone to read the article, which has some great pictures selected by Jeff Roby, who unfortunately is not able to be with us here today, but thanks to him for that. So here's the article. On Sunday, February 28th, more than 100 bicycles and cars supporting the Miami caravan against the blockade made its way through the streets of Miami. Plastered with signs and banners, flashers blinking and horns blaring, the caravan demanded an end to the U.S. blockade of Cuba. It was the eighth in the series of caravans held on the last Sunday of each month by a movement that has grown from 11 bicycles last July. Their numbers have been doubling from month to month with an ever more certain voice and greater level of organization. And I should say that the attendance of the cars has plateaued at about 100 cars per caravan now for several months. The central message was again underscored by the initiator of these efforts, Jorge Medina, a YouTube personality who goes by the name El Protestón Cubano, as he told a news conference at the start of this month's caravan, quote, "We are a movement of many different opinions. We don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, a capitalist or a socialist. What unites us is a love of the Cuban family that drives us to demand an end to the blockade of Cuba, of policies that restrict our right to travel, send remittances that help our families." Close quote. Medina was originally inspired by Carlos Lasso, a Cuban-American Iraq war veteran, now a teacher, whose bicycle trip from Seattle to Washington, D.C. called for bridges of love to end the embargo of Cuba. Born in Cuba, Lasso crossed the Florida Straits on a raft in 1991. He was rescued 6 miles off the coast of Key West and brought ashore. The Cuba Educational Travel website reports that he had previously spent a year in prison in Cuba. Later, he joined the National Guard and was deployed to the Iraq War as a combat medic in Fallujah. Afterwards, Lasso was shocked, the website notes, when, quote, fresh off 7 months of life-threatening and soul-crushing service in Iraq, he was stopped from boarding an airplane to Havana to see his family as a result of newly enacted Bush administration laws that limited Cuban Americans to one 2-week visit to the island every 3 years. No ifs, ands, or buts. War hero, no importa. Close quote. Medina, who left Cuba 11 years after Lasso, also did some time in a Cuban prison. On his first return to Cuba in 2012, after 10 years of living in the United States, he went to march with the Ladies in White, which is an opposition movement in Cuba founded in 2003 by wives and other female relatives of jailed dissidents. He met Antonio Rodiles. He wanted to experience this opposition. The trip made him discover, however, among other things, that that discourse did not represent him, that his voice was different. As with many other Cuban immigrants, the life they found in the US turned out to be different from the myths that motivated them to come here in the first place. They became students in the hard school of Uncle Sam University and graduated as different people. People who not only saw their new country in a different light, but also the homeland they had left. Old mythologies are being torn down by new realities. A U.S. foreign policy born in hatred of Cuba's 1959 revolution and fear that by its example, Yankee domination throughout the Caribbean and Latin America would be challenged, was given legs in the infamous Mallory Memorandum. The State Department document grudgingly and privately acknowledged the popularity of the new Castro government and insisted that the only way this could be overcome was by imposing such great economic suffering on the island that social unrest would be provoked against the regime. However, the crushing of the Bay of Pigs invasion by a popular mobilization of Cuban forces confirmed Mallory's analysis and gave birth to the blockade. For 60 years, Washington has adopted measure after measure to make Cuba safe for America again. And for 60 years, Cuba has resisted. I should also add that you'll see in some of these pictures, these caravans are very celebratory events. There is a rally in the beginning, people dance and party, and then at the end, there's often one as well. That's what you're seeing, these people dancing. But now the bipartisan economic and political warfare of 12 presidencies is encountering unexpected and unwelcome resistance in a place no one would ever have thought to look. The streets of those quintessentially Cuban parts of this city, known as Hialeah and Little Havana. It should not surprise any careful observer that the caravan movement that is growing here was inevitably going to find its voice among newer generations of Cuban immigrants. And when this article was written, the similar protests were happening in New York City, Ottawa, Montreal, Minneapolis, Seattle, and Los Angeles. So here in this last picture, you can see some recent signs that were made that I participated in, the graphic sign painting committee, that are being installed on this truck that will be part of the caravan. The caravan that's going to happen tomorrow morning. And here you're seeing a picture of the demonstrations in Cuba in support of ending the embargo. So that's the end of the excerpt of the article. Again, I urge you to read the full article on GPFL's website. I should add that many Cubans supported Biden for president because he said he'd repeal the 230 additional aggressive measures the Trump administration made against Cuba and return to Obama's normalization policy. Trump's policies were felt as painful and personal blows against the right to travel, to see and help their families by more than 500,000 Cubans in the US. Because Biden has not yet repealed them as he promised is extremely disappointing to them. For more background, I believe you can view a webinar that was held on May 27th, which is associated with the advocates of the Nobel Peace Prize for Cuban Doctors and sponsored by Code Pink. It's entitled "The Right to Live Without a Blockade, The Impact of U.S. Sanctions on the Cuban Population and Women's Lives," with Cristina Escobar and a stellar line of speakers. And there are links. I think Kathy's putting links in the chat for these various things I'm referring to. In that report presents, quote, calls on the U.S. government to immediately suspend those measures of the blockade that impede the timely acquisition of materials and inputs needed to address the COVID-19 pandemic in Cuba, including for domestic production of vaccines and medical treatments. Nowhere is this more evident than in the 20 million syringe shortage on the island. Code Pink, in collaboration with the Saving Lives campaign, Puentes de Amor, which is Bridges of Love, NEMO, the No Embargo Cuba movement, the People's Forum, and Global Health Partners, is raising funds to purchase syringes and other medical supplies to send to Cuba. If you haven't donated already, please click on the link in the article. If you have, please share the link with your friends, your family, and your social networks. You'll also have an opportunity to sign a petition calling on President Biden to normalize relations and end the blockade on Cuba in advance of the June 23rd UN vote, where the world will once again reject this crime against humanity. The only countries to vote against the resolution have been the US and Israel, and recently Brazil. Sunday, June 20th, has been set for the date of international caravans alerting the world to this annual vote. On the day of Wednesday, the 23rd, vigils are planned in anticipation of the vote. In conclusion, the platform of the Green Party of the United States states, quote, "We reject the U.S. government's economic blockade of Cuba. We ask the U.S. Congress to lift the embargo and restore normal diplomatic relations and respect for national sovereignty, and demand the U.S. government end its veto of UN resolutions pertaining to Cuba." Close quote. The platform of the Green Party of Florida calls for, quote, "the immediate normalization of diplomatic and trade relations with Cuba, an active promotion of cultural, academic, religious, and commercial exchanges between Florida and Cuba, including sister city relationships and other projects which build friendship and understanding between the people and communities of Florida and Cuba." Florida Greens have an opportunity to act on our platforms by joining the caravan movement, where it exists as in Tampa and Miami, and where it doesn't yet exist, to help organize caravans to build the movement to pressure President Biden to keep his promises to return to the Obama era of normalization with Cuba. To build bridges of love between Cubans and Americans, President Biden is urged to end the 6 decades long illegal U.S. economic war on the Cuban family by ending the blockade. Thank you.